The internet has told you that GDScript is faster than C Sharp. But what if I told you that both of these graphs are true? One thing that most people seem to agree on is that when you're talking to the engine a lot, like for example, rotating a couple thousand 3D objects, GDScript should be much faster. In this example, we're only measuring time actually taken to rotate the object. And as we can clearly see, wait, it's a tie? That's not in the script. The reason people say C Sharp should be slower here is because Godot uses its own data types called variant. And while GDScript can directly read and write to these data types, C Sharp data types have to be translated. So every time you talk to the engine to do a translation, there is additional engine work involved. So let's try and put this to the extreme. Here we have some code that read and writes to a Godot dictionary a couple 100,000 times. We then visualize this by this copyright-free character going up and down the pole a couple times until the flag is up. And as we can see, GDScript wins handily here. If we look at what the CPU is doing during this test for C Sharp, we can clearly see that as expected, a lot of time is spent on marshalling. So is C Sharp now faster or slower? Let's just look at some real code. For Dictatorship Simulator, I needed to generate these curved meshes dynamically. So I extracted just the generation code and translated it also into GDScript to compare the two. This code also calls the engine quite a lot, yet we see that C Sharp is winning quite clearly again. When we check what the CPU did, we see that marshalling is such a small part of the picture that I couldn't even see it. I was initially a bit confused by these results. Like most people, I thought, okay, clearly GDScript is faster when you just talk to the engine, and otherwise C Sharp will be faster. But when I thought about it, it's actually quite straightforward. Code usually doesn't just talk to the engine or just does other stuff, it does both. Sure, there's some engine stuff in this mesh generation code, but then there is also everything else. And so just looking at code, it's going to be quite difficult to really know ahead of time if it would be faster in GDScript or C Sharp. We just spent quite a bit of time benchmarking, and honestly, performance is the least interesting difference between these two languages. I don't think anyone's game died because of a couple milliseconds of marshalling overhead. So where does this leave us? Which language should you choose? This is where the script says that GDScript should lose, but it does not. Here I implement a simple movement component in both C Sharp and GDScript. As you can see, it's not just much faster to do in GDScript, the total lines of code in the end are also lower. And that's a pretty common thread here. In the benchmarking code, GDScript also needed significantly less code. GDScript also has much better integration with the editor, like for example, code changes get immediately applied, even when the game is already running. On the other hand, C Sharp tells me exactly what will break before I even try to compile. And mature tooling allows me to rename hundreds of call sites very easily. The general theme is that while it's faster to develop in GDScript, in C Sharp you catch many more bugs much earlier in the development process. In the end, the choice of language comes down to much more than just a couple milliseconds of performance difference. Personally, I cannot imagine writing Dictatorship Simulator in GDScript. It would be an absolute nightmare to write an effect system that works for cards, nodes, edges, etc., without having interfaces. Or the assets registry. It's a single registry for all sounds, icons, textures, etc. Without having generics, it would be a lot of really annoying work to be sure that what I've just gotten back is actually a texture and not a sound effect. But that's actually the thing. C Sharp is right for my project. Doesn't mean it's right for yours. Ask yourself what you actually want. What are your requirements? How big is your team? What do your other team members code in? Do you need to iterate and prototype really quickly? Well, then GDScript is great. How complex is your code? Is your code base so big that you constantly forget what you've done last week? Then C Sharp will help you a lot because it will immediately tell you when you made a mistake. Finally, it's worth noting that you do not have to choose. You can mix GDScript and C Sharp in any project. Also, I personally would not do it. So is the internet wrong? Not necessarily on the performance aspect, but on what matters the most. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked this video. And if the idea of a deck builder where instead of attacking, you manipulate the political system to destroy your enemies interests you, then wishlist Dictatorship Simulator on Steam. Have a good one.